So we're going to jump back into the testimony of Lisa Allen to the Post Office Horizon IT inquiry, and counsel to the inquiry Emma Price puts to Lisa Allen that there were numerous investigative failings in the case of Suzanne Palmer, including the lack of appropriate and thorough ARQ data presented to the court, as well as the integrity of the said data that was presented to the court, and the lack potentially of analysis of the Horizon helpline and MBSC helpline call logs at an appropriate stage of the investigation. Let's jump into the inquiry.
Contacting the helplines was a reasonable line of inquiry, which you should have pursued at the outset of the case, wasn't it?
Yes.
It was also a reasonable line of inquiry to request audit data from Fujitsu in this case, wasn't it?
Yes.
Two fairly strong admissions there, saying, well, with hindsight, I should have actually done these things which weren't done, which is some refreshing honesty compared to some of the accounts we've heard.
Do you accept that it was a failing in your investigation that you did not pursue those lines of inquiry?
I'm not sure if having obtained them would have assisted any further, but obviously having the data would have been, I suppose, making, all reasonable lines of inquiry.
You've said that you don't specifically recall Mrs. Palmer's trial, but on one specific point, Mrs. Palmer remembers there being a question from the jury, which was read out on the morning of the third day, in which the jury asked what Mrs. Palmer was supposed to do if she didn't agree the figure that Horizon had produced. Do you recall that?
I don't know.
Mrs. Palmer recalls that neither the prosecuting barrister nor anyone from the post office had an answer to that question. Again, do you recall any discussion of that at court?
I don't know.
Mrs. Palmer was found not guilty on all 3 counts of false accounting by the jury. The case closure report, which has been provided to you quite recently, records that the jury returned their verdict after 35 minutes. Mrs. Palmer recalls it being less time than that. Is that something you recall, the speed with which the jury returned the not guilty verdict?
I don't recall that, no.
I mean, that does sound like a very fast decision. We know sometimes jury deliberations can take days, so to return it within 35 minutes or less must mean they were pretty convinced, actually, that there was an issue with the case of some description, I would suggest.
We have heard evidence from Rob Wilson, who was the head of the criminal law team, that there would usually be a review done by the post office where an acquittal was reported in a case it had prosecuted. First of all, do you recall that being right, that where there was an acquittal, there was a review done by the post office?
I don't recall.
Do you recall there being any such review following the outcome in Mrs. Palmer's case?
I don't know.
I'd like to turn, please, to events in 2010 and 2011. Ms. Allen, you were sent a document by the inquiry for the purposes of making your statement, which relates to the duplication of transaction records in ARQ returns. And you commented on that document at paragraph 76 of your statement and said that you didn't recall the issue. More recently, the inquiry has provided you with 2 further documents relating to that issue. Could we have one of those on screen, please? The document references POL 001 69416. The top email here is an email from John Longman to you, dated the 15th of July 2010. It is entitled Forward, Duplication of Transaction Records in ARQ Returns. Would you agree it is forwarding on to you the email chain which follows further down the page?
It would appear so, yes.
The email below is dated the 2nd of July 2010. It is from Jane Owen to John Longman, forwarding to John Longman the chain beneath that. Over the page, please, we have an email from Jane Owen, also dated the 2nd of July 2010, to Jason Collins and Andrew Daly, copied to Mark Dinsdale. And it reads, "Dear both, please see email below from Penny Thomas. Mark, Alan Simpson and myself have had a conference call today to look at potential problems that this is likely to cause. Firstly, the suggested workaround will need to be put to our legal team, and until that has been agreed, any further ARQ requests, including those which have already been submitted, will be suspended.
Surely at this point, if there's an identification of problems with duplicate transactions in the ARQ requests, I mean, it's fair enough a temporary workaround, which they appear from the subject of the email to be suggesting just remove the duplicate transactions. But again, that's a manual process. You're having to edit audit data, which affects the integrity of said audit data. The solution here is for Jitsu to go to the source of the problem, i.e. the generation of the ARQ data, and assess whether the problem is with the ARQ process or with the way Horizon is assessing and logging transactions. If it's with the ARQ process, that needs fixing because summarising inaccurately audit data is no use to anybody. And if the problem's with Horizon itself, then the problem causing the duplicate transactions should be thoroughly investigated and resolved. And clearly by this point, and the 2nd of July 2010, they are on notice that there are problems with the ARQ data. The limited ARQ data they are requesting in cases and taking to court, yet prosecutions continued for another 9 years. Why?
There are 2 cases currently with the court, West Byfleet and Porters Avenue, and I will speak to Lisa and John about these as we need to know in what way what in the way of ARQs and the corresponding statements have been presented to court. In addition, I have identified the following officers as ones that could potentially have already had information presented to the court. Has sight of this email chain helped at all with your recollection of this issue?
I don't recall this at all.
The issue was described in the emails which follow this one. Have you had a chance to read through the email chain?
I believe I have. If you can scroll up and have a look at it.
If we can just scroll down so we can just see. And just scrolling down through so that Miss Allen can see which email chain this is. If we just stop there, please, going a little further up. Would it be a fair summary to say that the issue being reported by Penny Thomas was a number of recent ARQ returns for use in prosecutions contained duplicated transaction records?
I believe so, yes.
What was your understanding, if you can say, of why you were being informed of the issue directly by John Longman? Was it because of your involvement in either the West Byfleet or the Porters Avenue case? If it assists, West Byfleet was the Seema Misra case and Porters Avenue was the Jerry Hosey case.
I would imagine it was because of the Jerry Hosey case because I wasn't actually involved in the Seema Misra case. I obviously did attend for purposes of searching, but I had no involvement after that point, so I would imagine it was in relation to the Hosey case.
Can you recall how the question of what data had been presented to the court in those 2 cases and whether it was accurate was resolved?
I don't recall.
If entries were being duplicated, that would affect the integrity of the audit data, wouldn't it?
Potentially, although I think from reading the emails, I think maybe Penny Thomas has said that it didn't affect the balances or anything, it was just duplicate transactions put into the log or something along those lines.
And that's the bit that I don't understand, because if a duplicate transaction is logged and we presume, at a very high level it's summing the total of these transactions, that seems like a very strange assertion to make on behalf of allegedly Penny Thomas here, because that means that it's not adding up the duplicate transactions. I mean, the audit trail should be infallible. It should be exactly what's happened. So even if they are right and the balances are correct, which I think would be very open to dispute, then it would question why some transactions that have been manually identified as duplicate aren't being added, and are there other transactions therefore that maybe aren't duplicates that aren't being added to the total and therefore affecting the balance. It does call into question the entire veracity and integrity of the ARQ data as a whole.
The data being produced to the court
Yeah,
was incorrect, wasn't it? Because it
It was
contained
dupli-
duplicate entries.
it was duplicated, yes.
Did that concern you at the time, that incorrect data might have been provided to the court in support of prosecutions by the Post Office?
I don't recall this.
You just can't recall?
No, I don't recall it at all.
Thank you. That document can come down now.